The left has been demonizing Donald Trump as well for years, entirely, basically his entire public life. They've said he was a threat to democracy, that he's a white nationalist.
The terror attacks against Christians continue as a man just shot and killed 4 people and set a Mormon church on fire. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton says that a return to Christianity could, quote, damage America as the spiritual war for the country continues. We will discuss all that and more on this new episode of In Focus. On our panel today, we have U.S. politics insider and Gen Z personality Wade Searle, author and journalist Stephen Cox, and myself, Andreas Wilzer. So stay tuned. We're going to jump right in. Over the weekend, we had another attack on Christians. A shooter drove his truck into a Mormon church and opened fire. According to reports, at least 4 are dead and many more are injured. And this man also then set the church on fire, apparently. And it looks like most of the place burned down from the pictures. And he was taken out shortly after by police. All this happened in Michigan, and I believe you two both live in Michigan. So what are your first thoughts on this, Stephen?
Wow, what a tragedy. I mean, we're unfortunately becoming, this is all becoming too normalized in our nation. We just had the Charlie Kirk assassination, a transgender shooter killed Catholic children in Minnesota, and now this. And broadly speaking, I think, this is the devil unleashed. We don't know details about who this individual was. We know he was 40 years old, seemed to be a family man according to social media. We don't know what triggered him. We don't know what was going on in his spiritual life. But to do something like this, certainly there's diabolical influence. So we have to pray for the souls who are lost, as well as the attacks on this nation overall, because as we know, it's Christ or chaos, and it certainly seems we're tending towards the latter.
This man was apparently a U.S. Marines veteran who also fought in Iraq. I just read that he also had American flags on his truck, so definitely doesn't fit the bill of a left-wing terrorist. But as you said, it's definitely a spiritual battle that we're seeing, and the fact that Christians were specifically targeted, in this case the Mormons in this church, I think shows that this is a deliberate attack on Christians, and that the devil can use anyone, any deranged person, to carry out his deeds. And in this case, he chose this man. I don't know. It will be interesting to learn more about what his exact motivation was, but the fact that he targeted the church, I think, already says a lot.
Doesn't look like we have a clear motive yet, but it just goes to show that the battleground, like Stephen was saying, it's not political. It's actually spiritual. And as we've seen this past year, there have been numerous attacks on Christians, on Catholics, and now on Mormons. And it's becoming more common, which is horrifying. And so, of course, I'm praying for the victims. I live in Michigan, and so this hits really close to home for me. I got out of Mass, and I checked my phone, and I saw the news of this. And it's just horrifying. So Satan's definitely on the move. I think it's really in response to Charlie Kirk with his memorial. It was a stadium full of people honoring Christ. And so I think dark forces have certainly been angered by that.
These attacks definitely seem to be heating up. And I think my take on this is also that I'd be interested what you think, that the left is losing ground, and things like transgenderisms and other ideologies that are clearly pushed by demonic forces, in my view, they're losing ground. So I think the devil is becoming more, obvious in his attacks, like these murders, these killings. And this may actually be a sign that, actually the Christian side is winning ground in the US. And that is why these attacks intensify. So in a way, could be, to say that this is actually a sign that Christianity is making a return, and that these conservative values, or whatever you want to call it, is making a comeback, also thanks to the Trump administration in part, which, despite all his flaws, he is moving certain things in the right direction.
Well, I was just reading on social media, actually, that since 2020, there's been over 500 attacks, specifically on Catholic churches in the United States. So over 500 attacks over the last 5 years. That's an enormous amount, and it continues to, unfortunately, grow. And so I think that's a clear sign as any that there is certainly a diabolical influence growing in this country. And I think the proper response, again, is certainly prayer. I think we'll see how the left responds to this. I imagine they'll just call for more gun control. Again, their solutions are not rooted in the supernatural. They're rooted in politics. And as we all know, politics is downstream from religion. So when we have these sorts of things happening, something is off with our religious beliefs, right? So yeah, absolutely, there's merit to what you're saying there, Andreas.
With the transgender angle, it's really interesting. As an ideology like that descends from the norm, you could say something like that peaked around the late 2010s, and now it's starting to become less normal as time goes on. And as we're sort of seeing the culture become a little bit more conservative, all these people have made, unfortunately, the lifelong, life-altering decision of attempting to change their sex, which of course is impossible. But they've all totally messed themselves up using hormone therapy, sometimes surgery. And in a lot of cases, it's destroyed their social lives. It's destroyed their lives. I think with what we're seeing with a lot of these transgender shooters is we're seeing people who have destroyed their entire lives in the name of liberalism. And then liberals are sort of, liberal politicians are not really talking about the trans thing that much. They're not pushing that as hard because they know it's no longer palatable. And of course, that's still their agenda, but they're not pushing that as hard as they were, say 10 years ago. And so what you're starting to see is a lot of these people are starting to realize they were left behind, and they're just sort of victims of this all-consuming satanic ideology. And so they're really just crashing out, and they resent Christians. They always have. And you're seeing this at a lot of Catholic schools where these transgender people are going and just shooting up the entire school, getting as many kids as they can. It's really sick, certainly very evil. There's a strong force of evil in this country. And so, yeah, we just have to pray.
Speaking of evil, Hillary Clinton just said something very interesting that sort of goes into that same trajectory, because she said that a return to Christianity basically would damage America. I mean, she didn't say it exactly that way, but she said essentially how little she likes white Christian men. And she said that, the MAGA movement is so dangerous because we face, the possibility of going back to a time where, white men ruled with a certain persuasion and a certain religion. And she was obviously talking about Christianity. So the message here is clear. We have to push back Christianity, and at any ground that Christianity is getting right now, that needs to be reversed according to the left and according to, people like Hillary Clinton. So I wonder, how much does this kind of rhetoric feed into these attacks? I mean, of course, we cannot say, someone says something critical of Christians, therefore they want them dead. I think that's, we cannot make that jump, but it does sort of, play into that climate of, Christianity and Christians, especially conservative Christians who actually, believe the traditional teachings. They're kind of the enemy of progress. They're the enemy of, of freedom, of sexual freedom, whatever, however the left is framing it, of women's rights, this does sort of, I think, play into it at least a bit, and it does, encourage people like this shooter, like the shooter of Charlie Kirk, to say these people are so evil, so dangerous. They're basically Nazis, right? So we have to stop them, or we'll live in this dystopian right-wing world where we will be, nothing will be allowed anymore, and it will basically be the Third Reich, essentially.
There's certainly a connection there, and they certainly know what they're doing with that kind of rhetoric. I saw, for example, on Twitter, or I guess on X, the Gavin Newsom press account just tweeted out in all caps randomly, "Stephen Miller is a Nazi." And Stephen Miller quote tweeted that and said, "What do you think they're trying to do here? And, why do you think they posted this?" And to me, that just really says it all, because they know exactly what they're doing with this rhetoric. This is the exact same kind of rhetoric that got Charlie Kirk killed. Charlie Kirk goes on Jubilee, gets 120 million views, and all the comments, the ones that aren't agreeing with him, the ones that aren't conservatives, they're all calling him a Nazi for really normal, standard Republican views. Charlie had very few views that kind of went too far outside the mainstream to warrant being called something like that, especially. And so, what they're doing with this, when Hillary Clinton says that we can't return to Christianity, what she's implying with that is that Trump and Vance are dragging this nation, kicking and screaming back to Christianity, which, like, of course I wish, but that's not happening. And it's really fear-mongering on the side of the left, because the left sees that, and that's, of course, their worst fear. It's an open-ended question as to whether or not it's an incitement of violence in the truest sense, but I think Hillary knows exactly what she's doing with that kind of rhetoric, and I do think it's dangerous.
As well, I mean, when Hillary actually made these remarks, it wasn't too long after Kirk's shooting, actually. So for her to sort of come in and literally say that people want to recreate a world dominated by, quote, white men of a certain persuasion, a certain religion, a certain ideology. It almost is like she's dancing on the grave of Charlie Kirk in a certain sense. But beyond that, the larger point to what Wade's saying is absolutely true. The left has been demonizing Donald Trump as well for years, entirely, basically his entire public life. They've said he was a threat to democracy, that he's a white nationalist, he's trying to do all these evil things to people. And so when you have that sort of rhetoric, you're literally ratcheting people up to really see him as an enemy of the country and to actually sort of take action. Of course, we saw that. That's what happened. Now, of course, we don't know everything about his shooting either, but certainly the rhetoric is to a point now, especially with Hillary Clinton. At least we know now that it's in the open, that she openly hates white Christian men who actually want to uphold the biblical values of what the Bible actually says. We've all known that for decades, but this is probably the most explicit she's been in quite a while. And it's, again, meant to dehumanize. It's meant to say, okay, these are not people. These are, again, the deplorables, right? As she infamously said years ago, which was very similar to this. So I think, as Wade said, she knows what she's doing here. Unfortunately, let's hope people do not take those words seriously and act upon them. And again, this is what we have to fight back against. This is the sorts of Civil War type language that really is uncalled for.
Regarding Trump, he really did push back against the UN at his recent speech that was given last week. That was really kind of a milestone speech, because I don't know the last time that a US president, was that fiercely opposed the UN in his speech. So he said, very importantly, that, again, Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world, which is true. I mean, we talked about the US today, and there is persecution like we see, like these terror attacks. But there are other parts of the world, of course, where Christians are even, much more systemically oppressed and persecuted, and it's not even close, right? I mean, these numbers are incredible. I mean, if you look at countries like Nigeria, where hundreds are killed, thousands are killed probably every month. Like, it's quite incredible. And he called it out, and he also went hard against the EU, as well as the Biden administration, who preceded him, in terms of immigration. So he said that this kind of immigration that we're having now is completely destroying the country. It's destroying the heritage of these countries, both the US and the European countries. We cannot have it, he essentially said. And he really went after the mayor of London, essentially saying that they're going to have Sharia law soon, or they already have it in parts in London. And he didn't hold back on that front. So what's your take on this, Wade? What do you think about his speech and the way he sort of went after the immigration issue?
Well, he's totally right in the speech. Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world. And it's not just in America, like you were saying. It's in all these other countries and regions in the world. And I think I think he does make a very strong point there. And the truth is that, like I was saying before, the battleground is spiritual. A lot of people try to divide it among left and right sort of teams, like red versus blue, like our Republican politician won this local race over the Democrat politician. And what you see with a lot of these local races and even races higher up for Congress or for the House or for the Senate is that there's really very little difference with a lot of these mainstream politicians in the way that they actually govern. They campaign very conservatively on one end or very liberally on the other end, and they actually get into office. And of course, both sides complain about this, is that their politicians get into office and they become extremely lukewarm. There are very few who govern how they actually campaign. And so I think with Trump saying that I think he is making a very strong point there, is that, it's not necessarily left versus right, but it's it's Christians really versus the world, and specifically Catholics. And as we know, Vance is a Catholic. I think Vance is having a good influence on Trump, but I also think Trump's assassination attempt really brought him closer to Christ. He's starting to talk about Christ a lot more, and you're starting to see this in the news. He's starting to talk about heaven a lot more, and how he would get to heaven. And so I think as he ages, but also because of the assassination attempt, I think he's starting to naturally think about these topics more and think about his role as the president of the United States, how he can actually help Christians in the world today. And so it was really encouraging to see that from him. I want to see more like that from him, more rhetoric like that. I want to see action that goes along with that. It's one thing to say it in a speech, but we actually want to see something be done about it. And so I hope we'll see that soon.
Yeah, I thought it was one of his better speeches, actually probably ever at the United Nations. It reminded me of what he said in Warsaw, Poland, during his first term. And he gave a great speech there against globalism and encouraged countries across the world to embrace nationalism. And again, it really gets back to his populist roots when he first ran in 2016. And again, we saw that with his constant harping on immigration. He called out the United Nations itself for funneling over $370 million in cash assistance to migrants coming to the United States, basically the UN funneling illegal immigrants to come across the United States border. So Trump called them out. He also called out them for the teleprompter miscue and the escalator. So he really took a flamethrower to the United Nations, which I was very pleased to see, but also just in the speech generally, because what we're seeing, to connect this sort of to the religious side of things, what we just saw several weeks ago was a interview by Pope Leo with Crux magazine. And in that interview, not many people reported on this, but he actually expressed great concern. That was his quote, concern over the United States' immigration policies. And he actually said, we actually know before he was elected, he was very critical of J.D. Vance. He was sharing articles on Twitter that were critical of Vance's policies on immigration and the Trump administration's policies and plans to deport people. And I think this is sort of an interesting dynamic that's emerging here, because what we're seeing in the United States as well, especially with the clergy, is that in Illinois, the senator there, Illinois' Dick Durbin, who's a self-professed Catholic, is receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from Cardinal Blaise Cupich. And Cupich is citing Durbin's support for immigrants for giving him this award. And a number of other clergy are speaking out against this. And it seems to me that this is at the crux of the matter, is the difference between the Trump administration's policies on immigration and what Leo himself actually believes. And so we're seeing this kind of head-on clash, if you will, between Trump and Leo in a sort of a proxy war, if you will. Whereas Trump just went straight out at the United Nations expressing his great disdain and for open borders, whereas Leo said in his interview, well, we need to be more accommodating and embracing. And now that's trickling down to the politicians, as Wade is talking about, but also now even in the church. So I'm interested to see how this plays out in the future. And I think it's not going away. It's clearly the issue of our times. And I think the president has the better take on this than Leo.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Stephen. And, the thing with immigration is that if you really want to stop Christian persecution, a great solution to that is something like an immigration moratorium. I worked for Representative Paul Gosar in D.C. for a couple of years, and one of the strongest things that he pushed on during my time there was a 10-year immigration moratorium, where effectively we shut down all immigration, illegal and legal, for 10 years, because since 1965, we brought in something like 60 or 70 million people into this country, the United States. And, it's not to say that a small amount of selective immigration would totally ruin the country, but it is to say that we just simply brought in too many people. And in a lot of cases, we don't know who they are, but in the cases where we do know who they are, they're different from the people already in this country. Now, I don't mean like, they're a different color than me, I don't like them. But like, these people, like in Dearborn, Michigan, for example, they're all Muslim. And that fundamentally changes the fabric of the country. When you replace an entire population of a town in Michigan, and that entire town goes from Christian to Muslim, that does start to change an entire state like Michigan slowly over time. And you've been seeing this all throughout the country. The population of this country that is Christian and identifies as Christian is steadily declining, although there has been a reversal in the last few years. But a large part of that is due to the immigration. And so when you want to stop Christian persecution, the first thing Trump should do is shut down the border further than what he's already done. It's not enough that Trump has totally stopped all border crossings. You know, border crossings are at like historic lows, which is great. But what he needs to now do is look for avenues to shut down illegal immigration. And I think an immigration moratorium is a good idea. I think a lot of other Western countries should adopt this. But of course, in a lot of other Western countries, like in Europe, it's not really feasible because their politicians are more liberal and unwilling to do something like that. And so I think Trump needs to spearhead a policy like that. And I think he can, and I think he should.
My two favorite parts of the Trump speech was, first, he said that he's the U.S. president, but that he deeply cares about Europe, and that he is very sorry to see the destruction of Europe through and of its heritage through mass migration. And that really hit home for me as a European. And I wish, more European politicians would talk like that. And my second favorite part was, you alluded to it already, Stephen, when he just absolutely trash talked the UN, when he went after them for, not having functioning escalators, and then his teleprompter was broken at the beginning of the speech, and he completely wrecked them. He said they can't even run a teleprompter. How can they run peace operations and things like that? And then at some point he said that when he was real estate investor in New York, decades ago, that the UN actually, he was one of the people who could have renovated the headquarters of the UN in New York City. And they went with someone else, and he sort of went after him and said, oh, they have no idea about real estate. They don't know what they're doing. I would have given them beautiful marble floors. Now they have this ugly building, and it was more expensive than I would have done it. So the type of person that Trump is, and the fact that he goes in and says that in front of the UN is just, it's such a boss move. It's so hilarious. He's just such a unique personality. Only he can do that. And it just speaks to what an incredible politician he is, despite all his flaws, obviously. But the entertainment value with him is just off the charts. And I'm just very glad about that, because politics can be very depressing, boring at times, very depressing at others. And it's nice that Trump, at least, he puts in a joke every once in a while. And that was really good. I actually had to laugh out loud when he went on about the marble floors.
It reminds me a little bit of his first term. We got a lot of that with Trump 2016, classic Trump when he was campaigning, and during his first term, he had a lot more personality. Now, I think because of age, he's sort of mellowed out. But the UN speech definitely reminded me a little bit of that. It sort of reminds you that like the Trump animal's still in there, and we just have to draw him out.
Absolutely. So one more thing that's also, very critical actually for a life site potentially, because YouTube also last week announced that they would, after an investigation by the U.S. House Judiciary Committee, that they would unban channels that have spoken out against, COVID measures and potential election fraud in 2020, that they would reverse some of these bans. But then, high-profile figures like Alex Jones and Nick Fuentes, they made a new YouTube channel, and they got banned within 12 hours, I think. So this is, of course, very interesting to watch for LifeSite, since LifeSite News made channel with over 300,000 subscribers, I think, was banned in 2021. And it was a big deal back then. Even Tucker Carlson reported on it back when he was on Fox News. So the question now is, how is YouTube actually going to handle this? Is it just going to be very selectively? Okay, some people who said something against COVID can come back, but if you said something, slightly too right-wing, you can't. What's your take on this? Is this just an attempt by Google, who owns YouTube, just to sort of appease the Trump administration a little bit, or is there going to be actual change?
The thing is, YouTube replied on Twitter to a lot of people asking why all these people are banned, and they said that they're starting a pilot program soon to allow a few individuals to appeal their ban and get reinstated. And to me, that's the most ridiculous thing ever, because the problem is that all of these bans were political in nature and completely unfair, and the rules are arbitrarily applied. And so to start like a pilot program where you can pick and choose who you unfairly banned in the past, and then now you're going to reinstate them depending on like who you like the most out of that group. I don't know how they're planning on doing that, but it seems like more of the same. more the same problem that we've seen previously, where the rules are completely arbitrarily applied. And of course, they keep the rules, their terms of service, as vague as possible, so they can enforce them with ways you can't challenge. They can just ban whoever, and it's impossible to challenge it because their rules don't make any sense. They're vague and they're applied arbitrarily to anyone that they want to ban. So I unfortunately think that they're going to try and find loopholes to not unban anyone, or unban like as few people as possible, and people who aren't really that consequential in the first place. Having Alex Jones back on YouTube, for example, he would instantly be a titan on there. And so I really think they're going to be dragging their feet in doing this, if they do it at all. So we'll have to wait and see, but that's my take.
Yeah, I share in the skepticism as well. I think, though, it's important to note, firstly, however, that this conversation wouldn't be happening if we had Kamala Harris in office. I mean, I think they'd just be cracking down even more and even more blatantly. So first things first, it's good that it's at least they're open, at least floating the idea. I do agree, though, that the specifics will be probably not what conservatives are really looking for. And the larger picture here, I think, to tie it into what's going on other social media platforms. We just saw the takeover of TikTok. President Trump just signed this into law. And, who were the people behind that? Well, a lot of like Zionists who were really critical of the free speech going on that platform, and going out about the Palestinian conflict there. And we just saw Netanyahu himself meet with influencers and tell them, like, hey, you need to be our voice on these platforms, TikTok, Instagram, etc. So I find largely there's a sort of a worrying concern about commitment to free speech going on in this area. And if we're there, though, if LifeSite's there, we have to be there and to speak the truth and to speak it boldly, and to also to put forth our views that others who we share a general outlook on, who are still banned, so that our message can still get out.
Thank you for watching LifeSite's show In Focus. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Aloha, everyone. This is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.